1 week season.
Hello, OWS family. My name is Matt P. Rich. I go by P. Rich on the site, coming here with my first podcast of the season, Bias Check. Today we're going to think about some of the early season, especially week one biases that a lot of us may be prone to, and explore ways to think differently to make better decisions based on that. Again, like I said, my name is Matt Petrich. I go by P. Rich on the site. I've been with OWS since the beginning and have been a loyal subscriber. Started doing some writing in the open sections, sort of the user sections of OWS, and just love this family, love this community. So can't wait to give back and share some of what I have been researching and exploring in my time here. So I just want to start with an intro. We're talking about bias. One of the most common or universal biases is confirmation bias. I want to give you a few examples just to kind of get the blood going, get you thinking in these right modes as we start talking about this. Here's some examples in DFS, right? A lot of people, when they're playing DFS, when they're thinking about how good of a player they are, right, they remember that one big win. Right, that one big win they had instead of all the losses. Always shooting for that one big win. That's an example of just confirmation bias and the way that we like to think. If you buy stocks or you're an investor, right, often confirmation bias gets us to look at stocks that we like and look for the big rebound or the news that's going to sort of pump that stock back up, instead of looking at the more bearish reports. Our minds just lean that way. Obviously, we read or watch news outlets that we agree with, and we kind of dismiss opposing arguments, even if there's evidence. And we usually say, well, the other people are just biased, right, without considering that it might be true or it might be important for us to listen to. Finally, confirmation bias. People frame their Google searches, for example, asking it, why is coffee healthy, instead of what are some of the bad effects of coffee, right? That's our confirmation bias, just kind of manipulating in a way that the way our mind thinks. Lawyers, people who debate, right, they train their minds to argue the opposite point, to limit the effects of this bias and to avoid blind spots. What do we do for DFS? How do we challenge our thinking? That is the point of this podcast. Again, I want to start just with something I think is important at the beginning of the season. And I do this with my students too. I'm a teacher. I teach theology at a Catholic high school. And I start every year with my freshmen concentrating on the idea of know yourself. And I think that's important going into a DFS season, to know yourself. I think that's a way to avoid biases, or at least to recognize them. So let's do a little exercise. Wherever you're at, thinking about whatever you've been doing before you sort of started getting back into DFS or NFL DFS. What were you doing? What was your main activity? And what is a strength from that activity that you bring into the season? For example, a lot of people were doing best ball drafts. And we're going to have a little section on I call best ball hangover. But before we get into that, you also have a strength, right? Best ball drafters have been evaluating the prices, the ADPs of different people as they go up and down throughout the drafting season. That's a strength. Identify it. Maybe as you start getting back into DFS, lean into that strength by focusing more on the valuations of players based on price, right? Similar to what you did based on ADP. Perhaps it's a different sport. Perhaps you've been playing a different DFS sport like baseball. Lean into that DFS knowledge you have with regards to maybe ownership, finding leverage. Right, those are things that a lot of purely NFL DFS players are going to forget or not be as polished on as they begin the season. So figure out, right, what is your strength as you come into this season, and allow that to be an entry point for you as you kind of move into weeks 1, 2, and 3. But let's get right into bias. Again, there's this idea of best ball hangover. And if you haven't been playing best ball, I think this still will resonate with you. Looking at the week 1 main slate, we've got a lot of Vegas totals that are kind of towards the high end. They're all kind of mixed around each other. Let me just list these games. You got the Bucks and Falcons, the Lions at Packers, right, that carry the higher totals. And then all of these games at one point carried a total of 45.5. Texans at Rams, 49ers at Seahawks, Dolphins at Colts, Panthers at Jaguars, Giants at Commanders. Wow, that's an extremely difficult choice when deciding where even to start this week, especially getting back into week 1. Even if Vegas has given us some sort of official ranking, that's a lot of teams up there that could be in contention for stacks, right, for players that we want to target. You may also have a ranking of your own from the best ball season, right? Many of these teams were popular stacks, some very obvious choices, the Bucks, the Lions, and the Commanders, right? Their success last season. Perhaps you were drafting Miami in hopes that they have a return to their 2023, offensive output. There's a lot of ascending offenses, the Falcons, the Panthers, the Jaguars. It's tough to make a choice between that. But if you had been drafting a lot of one of those teams during best ball, right, confirmation bias would lead you back to them. It would be very easy to double down on that best ball knowledge that you have already expressed confidence in by drafting them. Confirmation bias, let me give you a little definition. We are more likely to consider or pay attention to information that supports an existing belief. Right? We have already, if you play best ball, you have already put money down on the line in support of some existing beliefs. That a certain player is going to have a good season. And so going into the regular season and building DFS lineups, it's entirely likely that any person who's been playing best ball scans the games and looks for that team that they've been drafting a lot of, or reading the NFL Edge, looks for information or ideas that support the team that they want to be confirmed on. Confirmation bias, at its worst, causes us to filter out information we don't like, right? Almost like we just don't even hear it. It doesn't register in our minds, but it might be important information to taking down a tournament. So how do you challenge that thinking? You can recognize it, but how do you challenge it? Let's take a couple examples that I just thought of. I have probably 6 best ball teams. So not many, but I did draft a Miami team. And one of my thoughts is, right, okay, well, Miami could go back to their winning ways. If they do, great. I got a discount. Going into week 1, Miami plays Indianapolis. You may say, sure, they're not high owned. Seems like a good fit. I already picked this team. Again, let me do a double. Okay, well, what if Miami does do well? What if they do succeed? Is that the only outcome in the game that you need to be thinking of? What if Miami does well? How does that impact their opponent, Indianapolis? Are they still going to be running the ball a lot with Jonathan Taylor? Are they going to open it up a little bit more with Daniel Jones? It's just kind of one way of challenging your thinking there. You took one step beyond, I like Miami, right? I need to, again, roster Miami. With all of this uncertainty, with all of these new choices, what decision will I make? Well, I'll make the one that confirms an earlier decision. That's bias, right? It could always work out, but you are now making a decision based on your biases. There are better ways to make decisions. Let's take another one. A lot of people have been drafting the Jaguars, and they are playing the Carolina Panthers, who had a bad or poor defense in 2024. this seems like an easy decision. Again, if you have been high on Jacksonville, this will be the spot to play them in week 1 against one of the worst defenses of last year. Let's challenge that thinking. Perhaps Carolina doesn't have the worst defense. Perhaps they found ways or will find ways early in the season to cover up holes that existed last year that the Jaguars are trying to capitalize on. Right? So let's challenge that thinking. Maybe the Jaguars are going into a bit of a trap. Maybe Carolina knows exactly what they do. It doesn't mean the Jaguars can't succeed, but it may take a while, which will slow down the game, which will decrease the fantasy goodness. Whatever bias you have where you are trying to confirm some other picks that you have made, some other success that you have had, challenge that. Take a couple steps to think, well, is there another way to use this information? Maybe I'm not wrong, but maybe there's another way to use this information that I have. All right, moving on. A very general type of bias is called observer bias. Basically, the brain's this highlights the brain's tendency to make decisions that seem easy. We want to make decisions based on what we have already seen happen before. Again, going into week 1, there are a lot of decisions, and we have less information than we've ever had about this season. Everyone says you have to lean into the uncertainty. Well, some people will lean into the uncertainty by simply making an easy decision. What is someone else telling me? What have I seen happen before? The Buccaneers took down a lot of DFS, milli makers last year. Their team was responsible for a lot of DFS success, the stacks of the Buccaneers. It would seem easy in the situation that they find themselves in one of the highest total games against, again, another ascending offense to stack up Tampa Bay. Right. And that might be a good decision. But are you just making an easy decision? Or have you sort of taken a deeper look at that and made that choice based on more than just what happened the last year? And again, you have to kind of honestly assess what you are thinking and how you are making those decisions. Are you falling prey to the bias? I know a lot of people go into the season knowing that stacking is an important thing, but there are easy stacks to make. And again, then there are stacks that are not so easy, but more profitable, maybe more plus EV. Right? If you're playing a quarterback, are you simply stacking his wide receiver 1 and the opposing wide receiver 1? Because that's generally what works in DFS. I don't want to go too far beyond that level of thinking. Maybe you're saying this to yourself, I've already identified a team I like, a quarterback. Let me, follow the correlation and just work with that easy stack, right? That can win a tournament. But again, a lot of times, and depending on the tournament you're playing, going against correlation can actually be plus EV. Like playing a negative EV correlation might be plus EV because of the unlikelihood of others to roster that combination. So again, I'd encourage you to go back and look at correlation. Is the correlation between a quarterback and a wide receiver 1 that different than quarterback and wide receiver 2? What does that mean, correlation? Right? If you haven't visited this for a year, it might be easy to say, yeah, let's lean into correlation. But go back and revisit it just so you know that you're making kind of the right decisions. Again, as I understand correlation, right? QB and wide receiver 1 are the most closely correlated positions, but only 50% of a wide receiver's good game or stats or success is based on the quarterback, right? 45% is based on other variables in the game. So it's correlated, but how much is that actually gaining you? And do you want to invest in that, or do you want to maybe take a closer look at some of the other pieces? Anyway, observer bias, right, points us to making easy decisions, especially with a lot of uncertainty at the beginning of the season. Let's work against that. Recognize those biases that are guiding you to make those quicker decisions. Try to take a different viewpoint. Argue the opposing viewpoint with someone, right? Your buddy. Call someone up, right? Who also plays fantasy football. Everyone's willing to talk about it in week 1 of the season, and just try to argue those other points. Again, just wanted to point out this week, as you see the banner at the bottom of the screen, OWS is 100% free in week 1. And I thought I would share a few of the ways that I use the tools that OWS offers, just if you are new. Biases is kind of it's a tool that I think is helpful for everyone, but it's more helpful if you've been playing the game for a few years, because then you can actually kind of notice your biases that you have fallen prey to and how they've affected you. There's a lot to learn in already in DFS, so other places to get started as well. I always start by creating my own initial thoughts. I think that's one of the most important things that I can do. It's one of the reasons I started looking at bias, because I wanted to know whether it was helpful to create my initial thoughts. And I found that, creating my initial thoughts helps me to sort of look through the biases that other people might be using or falling into. So let me kind of go through exactly what I do. But I try to identify first, just initially, how do I think this game is going to play out based on my years of reading the NFL Edge, the expertise that's given me. And I start to get better at that, 3rd or 4th week of the season, as I'm, again, reading all of the NFL Edge content that I can. I take a look at tournament winning players, right? Volume or target guys that can be on winning lineups regardless of matchup. I highlight those guys first. A lot of people will play those types of players. I look at game environments, trying to find ones that could produce higher scoring, especially passing. I look at the different angles that could take a game environment to explosive heights. Then I start looking at my plays, either single players or groupings of players that have shown some historical correlation. After that, I'll start making some lineups. At this point, I have pretty much remained in my own bubble. I don't try to look at other people's content or other people's ideas. Right. But then as soon as I have sort of some certainty to the people I like, I'll start comparing my ideas with others. I'll go look at the scroll. I'll go look at the interpretations, and just see if other people are seeing it my way. Sometimes I recognize that's a confirmation bias. And last year in particular, I would fall into the trap of, if I saw someone agreeing with my thoughts that I put out there, being more heavily invested in that. At my best, I use the scroll and I use OWS contents to kind of look at ways that my thoughts and others differ. And if I can find places that I am confident that are unique, I need to start seriously considering building those rosters. So I spend extra time there investigating those plays, groupings of players, making sure that I'm making a unique choice, aware of the probability of it, aware of some of the holes in my analysis, the gaps in my thinking. But I think that's how I use the scroll and the interpretations the most. I usually spend Saturday focusing on ownership. I used to use the Bink machine a lot to kind of create 100 lineups and shop through those lineups. I'm not going to have time for that anymore this year, so I'm going to cut it out of my process. But I realize that's gonna force me to be even more cognizant of my biases, because I'm not allowing a computer to sort of build my lineups. I am actively constructing them. All right, let's move on to another big area of bias in the first week of the season, and that's rookies and novelty bias. So novelty bias will affect us. It's going to tell our brains that whatever is new is better because it has not yet disappointed us, right? Our brains love to sort of be happy, be joyful, be at ease. We don't want disappointment. Our brains actually recall traumatic experiences and do not want to repeat them. We can convince ourselves of the sky high upside of a player, even though they have not yet achieved it. It is easier to roster a rookie, right, than a veteran because we know the limits of the veteran, but we have not yet seen the ceiling of the rookie. In 2024, we had 5 rookie wide receivers who were drafted pretty high. In best ball drafts, Marvin Harrison was the 11th wide receiver off the board. Malik Neighbors, wide receiver 22. Rome Odunze, wide receiver 33. We had Brock Bowers, tight end 7, and Brian Thomas, wide receiver 40. Those are all names that stand out, right? Most of them succeeded, had great rookie seasons. But let's look at week 1. Week 1, Marvin Harrison scored 1 point. Malik Neighbors, 11 points. Rome Odunze he scored 23 points in week 3 and had only one more week over 20 points. Brock Bowers had an insignificant week 1, had 18 points in week 2 and 23 in week 5. Brian Thomas had 14 in week 1, 11 in week 2, 9 in week 3, 21 in week 4, 23 in week 5. These rookies are going to take some time to get going, right? We may not see the upside of a rookie until later on, right? Brian Thomas took till week 4, week 5, and then later in the season to really start scoring points. If you remember, in week 2 of last season, Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors both rebounded strongly, somewhat coincidental. Looking at their rest of seasons, Marvin Harrison had 29 points in week 2, and Malik Neighbors had 28 points in week 2. Again, these things could happen in week 1. They could happen in week 2. They could happen later. The point is, rookies, just like any other player, are involved in game environments. They have other people that they are relying on to put up big scores. We cannot fall into the trap of novelty bias, right? Saying this guy hasn't disappointed us. I don't know his ceiling. I need to get him before everyone else is on him, or before his price goes sky high, right? There's this level of thinking that convinces us that a rookie is better than a veteran because of the unknown. Couple more numbers to throw at you. They looked up in 2023. Zay Flowers, week 1, had 17 points. Jordan Addison, 16. Jahmyr Gibbs, 8. Bijan Robinson, 20 points. Even Puka Nacua had 21 points in his debut. We remember a lot of what he did the rest of that season. Rookies just do not have a tendency to score well in week 1. Does not mean they can't. Does not mean they can't score well. I want to look at this year's rookies, and we'll look at one in particular that is getting talked up when we reach him. And again, talk about what do we do in a situation like this? How do we challenge this bias? To running back rookies that are being talked about that were highly drafted. Ashton Gianti, he's 7K this week. He was the 6th running back off the board. Omarion Hampton, he's not on the main slate. Travion Henderson is 5.5K. He was the 15th running back off the board. RJ Harvey, 5.8K, 21st off the board. And Caleb Johnson, 5.3K, 28th off the board, and is drafted actually ahead of Jalen Warren, who is being talked up as the starter at this point. So, and there's Bill, who's 4K, part of a committee for Washington. We'll have to talk a little bit about him. Wide receivers, Ted McMillan, 5.2K, the 20th wide receiver. Emeka Egbuka, 4.6K, 26th wide receiver. Travis Hunter, 5K, 35th wide receiver. Matthew Golden, 4.9K, and the 38th wide receiver off the board. Let's take a look at Emeka Egbuka. What do we do with a rookie that everyone wants to play? Ownership projections aren't quite out yet, but if you run, he's projecting quite well. Simulators are sort of popping him out, even at about 30% of my initial builds, just with no input. He is one of two sort of big name wide receivers on a team with one of the highest totals in a game that a lot of people predict could be high scoring. So it makes sense. But again, he is a rookie. At 4.6K, he would need about 20 points, right, to reach 4X's salary. Let's look back to week 1, 2024. Baker Mayfield threw for 4 TDs that game, and Tampa Bay scored 37 points. They were playing against a rookie QB and a rookie defensive coordinator. In fact, a lot of people picked on Washington for weeks to come until they started improving defensively. Mike Evans scored 23 DK points in that game, and Chris Godwin had 22. Right, both excellent wide receivers. Right, top of the league wide receivers. As I look at this this game for Egbuka and this game last year in week 1, right, that scenario's 37 points. Right, all 3 players combined, possibly for a slate winning score. This scenario sounds like an outlier. It's a ceiling type game, and we'd be happy to own Egbuka for it. But is this his ceiling for week 1? And can we find something else that we like similar to this elsewhere? Week 1 has so much room for maneuvering in terms of salary cap and pricing. Can I find another guy who's not going to be so highly owned, who has a similar ceiling, right, with such uncertainty? I mean, if Mayfield doesn't throw 4 TDs, can Egbuka get above 20 points? And if he can't, do I want him at that price tag? Those are questions just to think about. Again, push back on your thinking. Jacory Merritt or Bill is 4,000, right? Likely part of a committee for Washington. Again, there's a lot of uncertainty there. We don't know. But if we lean into that uncertainty, if we play him, right, and he reaches 4X's salary, say he reaches 16 points, which I think would be a good outcome for him in that space. Are you happy? Right? On a week where value is everywhere to be found, can his score contribute to a 200-point score? Right? We used to say 200 points is what you need to be in competition for first place. Possibly 225 points, 250 points if you need it. It's important this week, again, with value all over the board. Are we going to accept, a 4X score at that price tag? Or are we going to be looking, or can we find more? So again, just the questions to ask yourself as you're dealing with novelty bias. We have not seen the upside of these players. They have not disappointed us. We will like them more than veterans for that fact. Moving on to the main slate and almost wrapping up here, at least our first week of discussion, I just wanted to take a look at the week 1 main slate and talk about some of these novel situations. Not only do we have new rookie players, novelties to us, we have situations which are totally novel. And I'd like to say this, hopefully you aren't hearing this for the first time. Don't overweight what you know in week 1. Don't overweight what you know. In fact, look for ways that a game could play out that are not in line with the expected changes that a new coach or player will bring. right? Novel situations have not disappointed us. We are more likely to invest in them. But don't overweight what you know, right? Look for ways to think against that. Let's think of a couple here. I put a couple out. I want to share them with you. But let's look at Daniel Jones in Indianapolis. We think that we know who Daniel Jones is based on his time with the Giants. All right. I have a personal bias. I have not rostered Giants playing in MetLife Stadium for years. New York Jets as well. I have a bias against that stadium. And I won't go more into that. But part of me is thinking, well, Daniel Jones played in that stadium for his whole career. He played with that team for his whole career. He had a few coaches. But it's possible that going to a new stadium, going to a new team is going to help him blossom, right? Someone sees something in him. It happens all the time. On top of that, John Taylor is projecting well. I imagine he'll garner a lot of ownership, right? In a game against Miami. Miami had a weak run defense last year. Is Daniel Jones someone that we need to think of differently this year, right? He is going to a new situation, a new team. He won the starting job over Anthony Richardson. Perhaps there's something that we need to be focusing on with Daniel Jones. And as I mentioned earlier, if you liked Miami in best ball, if you drafted a lot of Miami, perhaps playing, a piece or two from Miami and then playing Daniel Jones and saving some salary at quarterback is a way to do it this week. So I'll sort of throw that out there. What's another thing we think we know? We think we know Pete Carroll. I'm a longtime Seahawks fan, so I've watched Pete Carroll. I'm a fan of Pete Carroll. And he's known for defense and a good running game. He's known for sort of waiting for the fourth quarter to try to win the game. But his style has changed a little bit with different offensive coordinators, with different QBs that he's had. He's had seasons of great offensive numbers. In fact, in this case, Las Vegas has been changing things around so much, they could come out throwing, right? Geno Smith played with Pete Carroll. Instead of handing it off to a rookie, Las Vegas could trust Geno to sort of get the season rolling. And they could really open up a lead through Geno Smith, through the pass. New England has major playmakers, right? In Henderson, possibly he makes some big plays. Next thing you know, these teams are trading haymakers in the fourth quarter with big plays against ill-prepared defenses. We think we know Pete Carroll, right? Don't overweight what you know. Perhaps there is something to a game stack like that, or perhaps there's something just to that could pump up your interest in Drake May, who's shown some sort of glimpses of upside. Here's another ugly one for you: the Saints, right? And Spencer Rattler. I just relearned that Kellen Moore was a quarterback at Boise State, a star quarterback at Boise State, head coach of the Saints, and he has a strong focus on developing quarterbacks. What if, right, in his second year, Rattler does just enough this game, just enough. He's in a dome, does just enough to push Arizona. And a couple players on the Saints and a couple players on Arizona are in winning lineups this week, right? We think we know everything there is to know about the Saints team behind a quarterback like Rattler. But let's look for ways that this game could play out that's not in line with what we think we know. I want to thank you guys for listening, guys and gals, for listening to my first bias check. I'll be with you all year. You can DM me on Discord. You can find me there. I think I am Maddie P. P. Rich across the site. I am at Matthew Petrich 1 on X. Reach out. Let me know what you like. Send some questions, and I'll look forward to a great year, recognizing biases, and getting you all set to get to the top of the leaderboards. See you all soon. Bye.